United Nations holds an emergency meeting to discuss Pyongyang's latest hydrogen bomb test. Photo Getty. Leo Sendrovich. 4 days Monday, September 4, 2017. The balance of power should be piled against North Korea. The so-called Democratic People's Republic of Korea is still a poor, farming economy, cut off from the rest of the world, and prone to famines. The calorie intake is so low it has stunted growth. North Korean men are on average up to 3 inches shorter than their South Korean counterparts. This should bring Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader, to the negotiating table. But instead it has driven him deeper into a dangerous feud with US President Donald Trump that threatens an apocalyptic conflict. It explains why, as the United Nations holds an emergency meeting to discuss Pyongyang's latest hydrogen bomb test, there are few options left to bring the country back from the brink. Already subject to sanctions, North Korea is already subject to countless sanctions. The most recent UN measures came after it tested 2 intercontinental ballistic missiles in July. Last month's resolution, cutting about $1 billion worth of North Korean exports, or about a third of the country's export revenue each year, was passed unanimously. There may be more measures, on textile products and clothing, which are now the country's most important foreign income source. Why tough sanctions could be doomed to fail in North Korea, but sanctions entrench nationalist fervor. 2 in 5 North Koreans, or 18 million people, are undernourished and more than 70% of the population relies on food aid, but 25% of gross domestic product is still spent on weapons. Domestic propaganda has been so effective that North Koreans enthusiastically embrace belligerence against all. Diplomatic endeavors are ignored, nor do the previous diplomatic endeavors to slow North Korea's nuclear program offer any promise. There was some brief progress during the 1990s, but the six-party talks with the US, Japan, China, Russia and South Korea, Tokyo that began in 2003 were sunk by the lack of enforcement mechanisms. Pyongyang simply ignored its counterparts, and continued its nuclear development. The English manager who wanted to coach North Korea and very nearly did Mr. Trump's threat to sanction countries that continue to trade with North Korea is also a non-starter. Some 90% of North Korea's trade comes from China, and the US will hardly stop doing business with Beijing. Still, China is desperate to control what it now sees as an errant child. Beijing buys coal and other minerals, while supplying food and fuel. It may now try to limit a ban up to 100,000 North Korean laborers from working overseas, including in China. It could even cut off North Korea's crude oil supply, a measure Pyongyang seems to have anticipated with its stockpiling oil supplies since April. Trump's explosive rhetoric. In turn, Beijing says a solution can only come from direct talks between the US and the North. But Mr. Trump's explosive rhetoric has made that even less likely. The president last month vowed to rain down fire and fury on North Korea, and warning that the US military is locked and loaded to respond, an outburst that merely emboldened Mr. Kim into similar bursts of saber-rattling. So much of the hope for a resolution is being placed on the two cooler-headed US officials, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Defense Secretary James Mattis. Unlike Mr. Trump, both have stressed a diplomatic solution. If a way is to be found out of this morass, it could be through them. But certainly not through Mr. Trump's Twitter feed. In news, http://cnews.co.uk